Hello? We are amplified. This is very good. Hello, and welcome to this session. I'm Francis Spufford, and it's my pleasure to be in conversation with Cathy Rentzenbrink and to talk about her novel Ordinary Time. Cathy is both a novelist and a memoirist. She is previously the author of the novel Everyone is Still Alive, which has some secretive connections with this one, which we'll talk about later. The Last Act of Love, a memoir, and brothers loom quite large in her fiction too, and we'll talk about that later as well. And Write It All Down, which is guidance by a memoirist about how the strangely powerful act of putting things into writing can actually help with living them in the first place. It says on her website, quote, "Despite being shortlisted for various prizes, the only thing Cathy has ever won is the Snathan District Ladies Darts Championship when she was 17. She is now sadly out of practice." So it is our job to console her for this tragic situation. How many people's first session is this? Do I need to do the housekeeping stuff? Oh, a little bit. Okay. In case of fire, leave through the door over there. And at the end, I will lead Cathy out in the direction of the cathedral and its bookshop, which is where you will be able to find her, both to buy her books and also to talk to her. And I will also enthuse to you about the church times, but I'll do it then, because first, Cathy, I think we might as well start with a reading, which is from the beginning of the book. So.
Yes, I'm going to read from the beginning. I'm now just going to say a couple of things to warm up my tonsils before I start with the reading. But it is very, very nice to be here with Francis, with all of you in this beautiful room on this beautiful morning. Feels very good. Last night, I dreamt I was watching a woman on a train. She had a book in her lap, but was looking out of the window towards the sea. There was a tension in her shoulders, a tight grip in the hand that held the book. I willed her to turn around. I wanted to see her face. Did I need to help her? And then the air between us dissolved, and I realized the woman was me. I might have looked like I was staring out of the window, but I wasn't appreciating the blues of the sea and the sky, or watching the distant people on the beach. All I could think of was the moment when I'd arrive at the station, and he'd be there waiting for me. I'd breathe him in and get into his car, and we'd drive off together. And I needed time to slow down then, because I couldn't bear that there would come a point when he would take me back to the station, and I would get on another train and return to a life I no longer wanted to inhabit. "How did you end up here?" he asked, before I had crossed any lines, back when I still hoped that the quickening I felt when I saw him could be put down to an innocent pleasure in making a new friend. We were sitting on a bench outside the church, the shadow of the monkey puzzle tree falling across his face. "It's a long story," I said. He smiled down at me. "We've got plenty of time." And then we go back to Cornwall, June 2019. And I'm just going to read you 2 pages from here. I rinse the last plate, put it on the draining board, and look out of the window. There are 2 enormous seagulls strutting down the garden path, and a magpie sitting in the trees staring at me. One for sorrow, I think, and I'm immediately annoyed because I remind myself of my mother, and I hate it when that happens. Tim comes in. He's wearing his dog collar. "Look," I say, pointing at the magpie. "All that black and white you're wearing. You could be the magpie's friend, arrived in the nick of time." He looks confused. "One for sorrow," I say. "Magpies are bad luck on their own. You need 2 for joy." "Oh," Tim says, "superstition." I wonder if I should try to explain that it was a joke, but can't be bothered. The closer Tim gets to God, the less he has a sense of humour. "I've got to get over to the hospital," he says. "Lillian Holt collapsed this morning. They think she's fractured her skull." "Poor Mrs. Holt," I say. "Where was she?" "In the garden, with her daughter. 1 minute she was talking about her salvias, and the next she was on the ground. She's asking for me. Her daughter says she's got something on her mind." He looks at his watch. Can I have some water? I turn on the tap, fill a glass. He takes it, and I see the movement in his throat as he swallows. His mind is already at the hospital with Mrs. Holt. Tim likes a crisis, and who could turn down being spiritually necessary in the face of death? He hands me the empty glass. I ask, will you be back for school pickup? He looks at his watch again. Hard to leave a deathbed. I can do it, I say. Don't worry. Not that Tim is worrying. It was his idea to collect Sam on Wednesdays so they could have some quality time together, but it rarely happens. Too many situations are hard to leave, and Tim's well-meant intention to spend time with his family collapses under the weight of the demands of his congregation. I need to get a job, really, as that's the only way he will respect my time. But if I mention it, he purses his lips, and I can see he still thinks it is too soon. He doesn't want to lose access to my tap-turning-on abilities until he is more settled into this new parish. He leaves without saying goodbye. I rinse the glass under the tap and put it on the draining board. Then I pick it up again and replay the moment when Tim asked for water and I gave it to him. What was the point of me in that interaction? A moving part, but less essential than either the tap or the glass. I could be replaced by a robot. Or Tim could just do it himself. This is my life, all day, every day, filling cups and plates and then cleaning them so they are ready for when Tim and Sam need to be replenished. I look out of the window. The seagulls have gone. The magpie is still in the tree. How strange that the whole of the human race cannot tolerate its single status and wants it to couple up. Don't do it, I whisper. Stay free. It stares back at me, then almost a wink or a grin, and there is a flash of iridescent blue as it flies off. Thank you.
As is already extremely clear from that, it is both a very sharply and comically observed book and quite a melancholy one in some ways. It's a novel about a vicar's wife, and as a clergy spouse myself, though men have it much easier, I can attest to the accuracy of some of its observations of parish life. But you're not a vicar's wife. Why are you writing a vicar's wife as a protagonist?
I have always been. I'm not a vicar's wife, and it's funny when you write a novel about a vicar's wife and you aren't one, because even though people do understand fiction, they also don't. I now meet people who assume I must have. And I actually like to say, I'm writing a novel about a vicar's wife, and then leave it be. It's very autobiographical, which again only works as a joke if people know me very well, because if they don't, they just think it's that I'm telling the truth. So my aunt was married to a vicar, and I used to go visit them. I was 7 or 8, and I was completely fascinated by the world. He was he was a curate, and he'd been a teacher. She was really the Christian, he wasn't, and he started going to church with her.
We're back in the 1970s, aren't we?
Yes, yeah. And he started going to church with her, and then he watched Jesus of Nazareth, and then he decided he wanted to be ordained, very, very quickly. And she, of course, went along with all of this, and then and she had 2 small sons, my lovely cousins, who you'll be relieved to know are very beautiful middle-aged men and very happy. And my uncle, who I was very fond of, is no longer with us. And my aunt is happy and thrilled that I've written a novel that means I get to hang out with people from the church times. That's like, yeah. I think it was worth her suffering through that quite difficult marriage so that this could then happen in later years. Have I? So I'm a girl. They're living in this place called Cemetery Lodge. I feel very grateful. I have a complete fascination for graveyards, which I think must have started there. I remember wandering around it a lot and reading the names on the gravestones and making up stories. And this house was very beautiful and sort of historic. Also, it was freezing cold. There were mice. There were mice droppings everywhere. So her 2 little boys were continually running with snot, with sort of rodents running over them. And my uncle didn't care. He just didn't want her to make a fuss about it. And I would go to church with them, which I quite liked, and I would see how he had to be nice to everyone, and it just exhausted him. And then he had nothing left when they got home. And then he would always be shouting at his sons because they interrupted him during morning prayer. And I think maybe we're more acute when we're 7 or 8 rather than when we're middle-aged. But I definitely felt there was some disconnect between all the things he'd just been talking about God's love, and then shouting at his children because they're interrupting his. And I think I remember thinking, like, I wonder if God approves of the fact that he's shouting at the boys because he needs to get back to talking to God. So I wanted to. So I've always found that interesting, and it's much wider for me actually than really just the church. I'm interested in relationships where one half of them has some kind of public life role that means that the spouses and possibly the children, where there's an obligation, a scrutiny, politicians, but increasingly in modern world as well, I think it just encompasses more people. And so I'm interested in all of that. And I'd also fancied, another idea was I'd always wanted to write a sort of a modern spin on Anna Karenina, which is one of my favourite novels, been obsessed with that sort of all my life. And I remember reading Anna Karenina after I'd become a mother. And I was really surprised that before that, I hadn't really noticed that Anna was a mother. And then after I'd become a mother, I thought, surely though, Anna Karenina is actually all about this little boy, her son. Surely this changes everything. So that was in the mix. And I sort of at some point realised I'd swoosh the two ideas together and then see what happens next.
It's got an epigraph from Anna Karenina, hasn't it? Is this in fact an Anna Karenina in which the little boy takes up his proper place in the story? Because what I noticed about this is it's got a marriage which starts off kind of cool and becomes awful and is heading somewhere better, but very much not happy ending-ish by the end. There are some hopeful signs, but it's very much not a great passion. And there's an affair which is glorious while it lasts, but is clearly incompatible with the rest of her life. But the kind of emotional constant in it is Anne's love for Sam, her son. Mm-hmm. Do you think of that as the emotional centre of the book?
Yes, it probably is, I think. It's probably the thing that she comes to. And it's, and I just like Sam, the character. I really enjoyed writing him, and I put quite a lot of my son's things that he said at that age in, and I like the way children think when they're not censoring themselves. So yes, it probably is. I'm not sure though. I really did. Once I kind of had everything going, I just let it do its thing rather than think about. So I didn't really think about what's the centre of this. I just thought about how, and I didn't know all the decisions she makes. People often want to know this. I didn't know what decisions she was going to make. I didn't know.
You're not the kind of writer who knows the ending when they begin.
Never. No, a character sort of like comes to me, and then I think about the story, and then I write and imagine so much more than ever ends up on the page, and then I kind of let them do. I let what happens, and sometimes I do feel like a bit of a cheerleader. Like there were a few times, and I know it sounds bonkers because I'm doing the writing, but it doesn't really feel like it's in my gift. There were a few times with Tim where I would think things like, I really hope Tim manages to step up to the plate today. And then he just wouldn't. Again, he'd be offered the opportunity to pay some attention to his wife and his son, and he wouldn't be able to do it. But it didn't feel like I was making that happen. It just felt that I was the rather sad, neutral witness of his inability to get it together on a particular day.
One of the things I try to break gently to my writing students when I'm teaching writing is that there is this fundamental kind of almost childishness about writing a novel in which you come up with some imaginary people and then you take them seriously as if they were really there, and listen to them and attempt to be surprised when they do surprising things. And there is little dignity in it, but it is also, it's what we do. We were having a conversation last night about the extent to which you discover a story rather than kind of intending it. Does that include this is a very funny book about some quite unhappy people, and funny and unhappy is not it's not a very frequent combination. Is that something you arrived at, or something you set out to do, going, that'll be an interesting mix?
Yeah, I did want to do that. And I think, so I feel that, so my dad is Irish, and he's very funny in that very, like, it's a kind of a gallows humour. And really and I notice, and I feel that I have that sensibility in me. And in my family, in my birth family, we understand this. It is a real gift, if in a really gruesome moment, one of you can find a joke, and you just kind of have this moment of laughter. It's the biggest gift you can give another human. But again, it feels like almost God-given to be able to do that. But I've noticed actually lots of English people don't really like that. So I've often been in situations like, if I try to do that with people where that's not their language, their currency, you are more a bit on the receiving end of what Tim, Anne's husband, says to her, which is she tries to make a joke and he says it's not a laughing matter. And the way I think, it's like I think everything has to be a laughing matter, and the more serious and distressing and awful it is, the more it has to be a laughing matter. And I think that's, and my first book's about the death of my brother, but it is also funny, but it's funny because my dad, I just write down the things that my dad would sometimes find to say in these terrible moments, and he would find this joke, because if he didn't in that moment find the joke, we might just all lie down on the floor and die, like we might just expire. And that's what humour is. For me, I was talking to a Jewish friend about how he might operate like that in a Jewish way sometimes, a bit more. I don't think it's an Anglo-Saxon way of behaving in the same way. So I think that's more of an understanding that laughter is, you laugh because you're having a good time. Whereas I'm not, I always try to have a good time, even if I think everything's, I hope I'm having a good time at the end of the world, as it were. But that's what it's for. It's not like I'm trying to cheer myself up into banality. So I wanted my heroine to have the same sensibility, because I wanted to. I think it reminds me of that old joke about sex and violence. I get enough of it at home. I think the world is delivering enough in the way of challenge at the moment. I don't think people necessarily need it from their fiction. I certainly find that I don't. So I wanted to write a book that would give a reader like a few hours off from their own lives and their own difficulties. I didn't want to write something that was dreary or depressing, but I also wanted to write something that was substantive, because that's what I'm looking for in fiction at the moment. I can't take any more weight, but equally I don't want candy floss or sweetness. So I'm looking for that kind of combination of something that feels really enjoyable, but actually, I think if you can have humour in something, it sort of sweetens the pill a bit, I suppose.
Yeah, although that makes it sound like medicine, and I'm not sure that's quite what you have in mind either.
No, but I thought like, can I write this novel and without like depressing myself and everyone else? And I knew that if it was going to work, it probably had to be funny. But equally, I knew that I felt that the character almost doesn't really exist without it. So in that sense, it wasn't a conscious choice. Once she existed, I knew that this was what she was like. And I knew that the way she survived this life with this man who pays no attention to her and their child was to sort of run this kind of like slightly funny commentary in her own head, I guess. Yeah.
And when we see her kind of out of the vicarage, when she gets on the train to London, and the train, which there's a picture of it on the front of the novel, it's a vehicle of kind of magical relief and transformation, really. When she goes to London, we discover that her own family, although with some very dark and difficult things in it, is a place which takes laughter for granted. I noticed. I mean, this book too contains a much missed Irish father and a troubled but brilliant brother. And do you have a kind of internal repertory company who turns up in lots of your stuff?
I do feel a bit. I used to try to do things writing fiction where I'd think like, well, I don't want to write about anything I know about or anyone like myself, so I'm going to make this person something else. I just found it really difficult. And then I like writing about Irish fathers. Got one. He's still alive. which is nice. In my first novel, the main character, her mother dies at the beginning of it, and a friend of mine who I hadn't seen for ages read my novel and then sent me a note saying, "I really hope your mum's okay," which I thought was quite interesting because, again, he felt that, well, he just thought I'd done a really good job of writing about a middle-aged woman whose mum has just died, which I did make up. I made that up. So it's not that I don't only source from myself, but I think there is probably a particular sensibility, again, to being like half of something. It's very interesting being half Irish because, of course, you wouldn't know unless I told you. So it's not, I don't have a sort of an external signifier that tells you that I'm an immigrant's daughter. And as my dad likes pointing out,
you've got reddish hair and you're wearing green.
Yeah, I don't look un-Irish. When I was in America, people will say to me all the time how Irish I look. But I think it's something to do with whether or not you choose to self-disclose your otherness. But you still feel it. So we went to this very nice dinner last night. I still very much felt almost like, which was very nice, and I enjoyed it. Nobody was looking at me thinking like, look at that woman over there, she doesn't belong. I can tell her father grew up in a slum and doesn't know how to read and write. I can see, her fingers twitched when the food arrived because she was about to gobble it all down before anybody took it away. But she's taught herself middle-class manners. Look, I can see it. So nobody else knows that about me, I don't think. You probably weren't thinking I was having to control myself not to bolt my food.
Oddly, ladies and gentlemen, I was not thinking any of those things.
But I'm always... And not necessarily in a bad way, as long as I don't succumb to insecurity. I actually love that fish out of water feeling. Like, this is interesting. Look at all these people. Like, ooh, how have I got here? You know, that kind of thing.
Is that the same thing as the famous sliver of ice in the author's heart? Is there a kind of coldness in having a bit of you that's the observer?
I'm never sure I've gone for that. And I think that people... When people ask me sometimes, should they write their difficult memoir? Like, maybe... some people have got something they want to write about and they're worried that writing about it will upset other people. And obviously it's a complex thing. I don't want to put anyone off. But I realise that what people think I'm going to say is they think I'm going to say yes. They think I'm going to say yes, publish and be damned. Put yourself through the mill. Get rid of the rest of your remaining relationships. You know, who cares if all your sisters don't want you to write about the other dead one? Get rid of them all so you could... You know, people expect me to be gung-ho and say, you got to have a chip of ice at your heart, whatever. And it isn't really how I feel. I think that maybe the really nice thing about being a writer, again, it's almost not... It's just that you do see the world. You can't help it. I often wonder whether it's a bit tedious being a writer. Maybe in a bit the same way as having a clergy... You know, being a clergy spouse. I think spending a lot of time with a writer is probably quite hard work because you can't help materialing people. You can't help not noticing. Yeah. I did have a thing once when someone said to me, like, I don't like the way you notice everything. And I'm like, well, I can't turn that bit off, I'm afraid. Yeah. Like, we can negotiate about other things, but if you wanted to not be known. I'm not a person to hang out with if someone wants to not be known. If you want to keep your emotional secrets, it's a bit pointless because I will.
Okay.
You know, so there you go.
Consider us warned.
Yes. But then, of course, lots of people really want to be known. Again, don't we as human beings have this great desire to be known? I'm the right person for that person. So I suppose that's...
Yeah. My daughter bought me a T-shirt which said, I'm a writer, everything you say may be taken down and used as material. So, yeah. But I wear it underneath shirts, so nobody actually hears the warning.
Yeah.
I need to steer you back slightly towards faith, since we are a faith and literature festival. You are in company with in some ways an unusual group of readers here, because we are people who find the church setting, it's not exotic, alien and far away to us. It was something you had to feel your way into and think your way into. Were you aware that some of the people who were reading this were going to find it quite unusual for 21st century Britain? Did you think, how can I present this so that people will get it?
Yes, and actually that was all really hard. And I think the novel took me so long because I had to research. Well, again, you have to... I think for any bit of a novel, whether it's setting or anything, you need to know an awful lot, and then almost none of it really ends up on the page. But you do have to know a lot to be able to do it.
And you don't know which bits.
You don't know which bits, yeah. But having said that, I enjoyed that. So my aunt, I went to a lot of Cornish church services with my aunt, which again she really liked. That she had my company, and had a lot of conversations with people, all of which I enjoyed. And I think as well, what was in my mind was I wanted to write an old-fashioned novel. And again, I just felt I don't really like reading about like phones and text messages and stuff in novels. So I thought, well, if I'm writing a contemporary novel, can I write a contemporary novel that is also quite an old-fashioned? I wanted to write a sort of or maybe not even old-fashioned, but like more timeless human dilemmas in a contemporary setting, which is difficult, of course, because it feels like everything is moving so fast news-wise. So I found that difficult to do, but then also, I guess, quite interesting. And of course, I don't think my publishers were over the moon about me wanting to write a vicar's wife novel. It's not it's not the sort of the thing you do to get the big money and attention, to be honest. I don't know whether maybe it is here, but it isn't really in my world. So it felt like it was my sort of slightly odd thing to do. And then I did feel very worried about upsetting and offending people, because I in general feel worried about that. And then I just had to do the thing I do with all my books, is I just have to imagine that nobody will ever read it, because if I imagine lots of people being angry with me, I can't really do it. I had an email from a vicar's wife who's cross.
What did she say?
The other thing is I didn't read it myself, so I have a part-time assistant who looks at my correspondence first and helps me manage it. And it's not because people write to me in a horrible way, but because of the book about my brother, I get a lot of very sad correspondence, which truly is a privilege and an honour, but I don't want it all the time and in the moments when I'm not expecting it. So she basically batches up all my correspondence, and then once a week we go through it together. She's a very sweet young woman called Grace, and she said, "Now, I'm not going to read to you, and I don't even look at it. She comes round to my house and she'll say, like, you've had this, it's really sad, but I think you'll like it. And then she said, I'm not going to read to you or suggest that you read this email, but as we've agreed, I will tell you about it, that you have had email from a vicar's wife who's cross about your portrayal of vicars." And she said, it is quite long and she is quite cross, but then she does say at the end that she hasn't actually finished the novel and maybe things change. And I thought that was interesting. Yeah. So I told Grace to reply to her, again, as Grace, say that. And I said, you can do whatever you like. You don't have to, we never tell any lies. You don't have to say I've read the thing. But tell her that if she finishes the novel and wants to write to me again, I'll read it, because I'd be interested in that. Because there's a way, again, for fiction, you need a bit of conflict, don't you? You need people to... If you're going to have a surprise at the end, that means people have had to have been one way. So she was... And a lot of people really dislike the vicar, and then by the end of the novel, they will say, a bit more like that. So I thought that was quite interesting. But I've had lots more correspondence from people saying that from clergy spouses saying that they think I've just got it. So that feels really nice as well.
With a bit of satirical exaggeration, when vicarage is not usually quite that mouldy.
That is true, and of course I had very helpful research help, am I allowed to say, from Sarah, who did continually rein me in and say, I just don't think it would be this bad, and I just don't think, because the vicarage is awful, but for the story really, I think the house needs to be awful. And I had this image of them in these awful single beds with these purple floral eiderdowns, and I needed to make that happen. And again, I tried all sorts of ways, all of which Sarah wouldn't let me. She wouldn't let me let Tim leave all their furniture in the house where they'd been in Newcastle for the curate. She said that wouldn't... there was all these things she wouldn't let me. She ended up, just about being... And I nearly put an author's note in apologising to diocesan property departments everywhere.
Yeah, I think you should.
And I did put a bit in where it turns... Like, the worst thing that happens, it turns out actually not that it's the church's fault, but that Tim has actually forgotten to report a problem. So there was that, so...
Yeah. The Church of England serving novelists' need for appalling decor everywhere. I noticed though that it is actually doing something for you more seriously. It is providing you with a place, not out of time, but where people are attempting to kind of to orient the ordinary progress of time on something permanent, and we would probably say eternal. The title. Why is it called Ordinary Time? It has a liturgical meaning. It's the very long trudge through bit of the year where there are still 327 Sundays until Advent. But why is the novel called Ordinary Time?
So I was in one of my research churches, St Endelian in Cornwall, and I looked down and there was a service booklet and it said Ordinary Time on the front. And I just said, what's that? I didn't know about Ordinary Time. And then I found out about Ordinary Time and what it was. And I knew I wanted I wanted a fairly tight time frame for this novel. I didn't want it to go on. And also, I really wanted to write it before COVID. I wanted to set it before, so a contemporary setting, but pre-COVID. I didn't want to write about COVID, which now feels like obviously. But at the time I was writing the novel, of course, COVID had happened. And I was reading a lot of novels where the writer was just writing about COVID because obviously it started happening at the place where the characters were. And I also, because it does have a relationship with the novel before, I felt I wanted to cram it in. I wanted to cram it in 2019, just pre-COVID. So the novel ends, and again, I think that
there's a nasty little irony actually there. Let me point this out. We've attained a state of kind of hopefulness at the end, and we know as readers that the COVID wave is just about to crash down on them as they go, 2020 will surely be better. Yeah.
But I like that because there's something about, and again, I don't think you, as the reader, you don't need to notice it. We talked to my editor about whether we should take out, it says Cornwall 2019. I thought we could take that out, except then I think you need to know you've gone back in time. We kept it. So you don't need to know it's there, but I think there is something about just having that awareness that they think. It's something about our little human lives, I think, isn't it? Like I quite like that cosmic insignificance theory of, it helps me just to think I'm just a little blob somehow. And so the characters to a certain extent, as we all do, we take ourselves very seriously, and then every so often something reminds us that there's like a bigger thing going on. And I feel I know some of the things that happens next. Like I think Tim has a really good COVID, the vicar. I think he's really brave. I think he goes and helps people. And you remember that period where everybody did think they were going to die alone because nobody would bring them any food. Yeah. And I think he puts Anne and Sam in a little room and brings them food and goes out round, and it's very moving to me. And of course, this is the vicar that when you meet him in the beginning, he's not very nice. Like,
She really believes in her characters.
Yeah. So and it is, I can really see it, and it's really going to work for him. Yeah. And then of course, what is she going to feel in the little room with her son? Because probably initially she's going to think, oh, like I did make he's a good person. And he's saving all these people. And then maybe at some point, because it won't last, will it? That, as she says at some point, Tim would have been much happier if he had some lions to fight. Yeah. Like it's the attrition of modern life, I think.
His lion is basically coming, isn't he?
Yeah.
But isn't she going to get to, spend COVID walking on the South Cornwall coast path with her son, kind of waving at people from a safe, socially distanced distance?
Yeah, probably. Maybe it'll be all right for... Yeah. Maybe it'll be all right for them as well. And of course now it feels really different, doesn't it? Like I almost have to intentionally time travel to that period of fear at the beginning. Yeah. But I think we can do that, can't we? We can remember it. What I think feels really odd is the way that it often feels like a bit of a dream. Yeah. So I did, and again, obviously I did, so I didn't want to get into it fictionally. So part of the Ordinary Time framing was I thought it would discipline me to make sure that... Well, originally I was going to end it in Epiphany, but that's because I didn't actually understand what Epiphany was from a practical point of view. So again, Sarah had to point out that
You'd have to have Christmas first.
Yes, my big metaphorical Epiphany couldn't happen in the way that it happened because I'd got confused about the church calendar, which was all quite fun. And
speaking for the very unusual audience you have here, I think you missed a trick in not calling a novel about a vicar's wife having an affair Sexagesimer. But no one in the rest of the world would understand that joke, so I withdraw it immediately. The non-joking question. Did writing this change your relationship to religion in any way?
Well, I mean, probably quite significantly. I still don't really understand this myself, but I'm going to assume I'm in quite safe company. I live in a very secular world, and I when I started writing the novel, I did think, like, is this just because I want to go to church and I'm embarrassed to tell my atheist parents and all my friends that I want to go to church? So I've basically made up a novel to write that means I need to go to church. Then, and apologies if this is upsetting to anyone, I went to church and just thought it was awful. Like, all this yearning within me for some kind of connection with the divine, I'm afraid, was not proof against people reading out announcements about things. And the way that the technology never works. And why have people got technology? Awful sound systems that are always about to explode. Some really peculiar screen where even the getting of the screen will have been very, very tense, with lots of people being for and lots of people against, and then the screen never connects. So just before the service, whoever's taking the service looks very, very stressed because it's not working and someone has to run off and press print, but then the printer doesn't work anymore because the screen's supposed to be working, and everybody's arguing about it in little pockets. And I just thought, where has God gone? Like, I came here for this, I can't find it. So, and then I thought, well, and then I finished the novel genuinely thinking like, oh, well, I thought that might, but I will, but between us, since finishing the novel, I don't know, there's definitely something. So I was an atheist, I used to say, though of course now I think, of course I wasn't, it's really obvious. I felt I could go through my books, I think, with a highlighter pen and then put the God yearning, just highlight the obvious to me now, sort of God yearning in it. I was an atheist, and then I moved to being an agnostic. I often think atheists, it's just like a different variant of belief, isn't it? Because they believe it so strongly, is what I feel.
You can certainly annoy atheists like crazy by saying that.
Yeah. So I kind of thought, I don't want to describe myself as an atheist, because I'm not in any way. I think I'm agnostic by nature. I don't run with a lot of certainty, other than we should all be nice to each other. I'm
a very Christian point of view.
Actually. Yeah, I'm very indecisive in terms of how I wouldn't have any opinion about the screen, except I would worry that people would start falling out with each other because they all had opinions about the screen. It's that kind of thing. Then I moved to being agnostic, and then at some point I rebranded myself to a hopeful agnostic. And I'd say I've now gone kind of very, the divine is everywhere. I love other human beings. I have to stop myself from stroking people's faces when I feel moved, that kind of thing. But I don't know what it means in terms of, I'm not going to church or believing in a particular thing or any of that. So that's my...
Anyone who can think of a possible next step for Cathy that doesn't involve malfunctioning microphones and hymns projected onto screens should write to her assistant. Where are we? We do laugh.
We laugh, my assistant Grace and I, that maybe a lot of people want to be screened from people that would write to them and say, like, I saw you speak at whatever, and I wondered if you might like to come to my whatever church, synagogue, mosque with me this weekend. And maybe lots of people would think you'd need an assistant to protect you from that, but I'd be like, yes, write that to that person.
Okay, you have been told. I think at this point I should probably stop asking questions and open the floor for you to ask questions. We have a microphone. Do we have this microphone, in fact? Yes, okay. I'll reluctantly let go of it.
Though if you are, after saying about church sound systems, if you are able to project, you could always try that. Maybe some of you are used to doing that from your pulpit, I don't know, who knows?
Now you've taken this experiment into writing as from a church point of view, will you be writing more church novels?
That's a very interesting question. I don't at the moment feel that I've got there's something as well I think about being an outsider that in general is useful. So when I first had the idea for this novel, actually, I met this really brilliant lady vicar at a event. She was a chaplain. And I kind of thought... I thought about the heroine being a lady vicar, and then actually I realised I didn't want to write from the perspective of someone with a faith that was solid enough to be a vicar. I didn't really trust that I could. But also, if you were writing that person, they would know the world. So the point about my narrator is she doesn't have a faith background, and so therefore she's looking at this world as an outsider, and a lot of the humour, but also like the fact that she can explain it to an audience that don't understand it in an organic way, rather, it's that sort of thing. So I think having done that, I can't really imagine it another way. Though I really want to write a historical novel, and all my historical novel ideas are faith-based and always have been, really. Nuns, monks. And I bought this book recently called The Decline of Religion and the Decline of Magic in the 17th Century. And I don't even know why I bought it, except I just sort of, again, this is my, so something like that. So I think, but possibly again a bit, maybe in a bit of a Narnia-style way. I feel that there might be some thrum underneath things, but not, maybe even not identifiable. If I was writing a contemporary thing, but possibly historically, I might write about nuns. I interviewed this woman who'd written a book about witches, and I'd never before so clearly seen the way the role of sort of religion and witches, but also that all the religious people involved were men and the witches were women and that kind of thing. And that did make me, again, my fingers had this kind of like funny tingle when I was, and also sex. You're probably all much better at talking about sex than I am, because I feel often that religious people aren't actually in some ways quite so much of a pickle in it as other people are. Who knows? But I felt reading this sort of church testimony from medieval times, you sort of feel like, oh, this is so sad, really, because this man who's told he's to be celibate, he obviously fancies this woman, and he can't admit it, so he's got to think that the devil is doing something in her that's doing something in him, and now he's got to punish her for this. It made me feel incredibly sad, but then it also made me feel that was maybe fertile territory for something or other. So those are my current, I'm always writing of a million books at the same time in my head. Who knows eventually?
Hi, Cathy, thank you very much. I really enjoyed reading your book and really resonated with what you've said about it today, except one thing, and that was the ending, which I didn't find hopeful. And I felt as though, the vicar's wife had given up her lover, obviously. I got the impression that was through guilt. And that she went back to a life of duty and settled. So I'm interested as to why you intended the ending to be hopeful.
Well, I mean, it's not that hopeful. I completely agree. And it's interesting because when people talk to me about the novel, there are very definite two camps of, I'm so glad it ended that way, and how could you possibly end it like that, you horrible human being type thing. And probably the way I feel is that, I think there's something that people often think that she doesn't go off. What I would say is, if you look carefully at the conversation she has when she finishes her affair, there isn't really anything else on offer. And I thought a lot about Anna Karenina, and of course Vronsky makes Anna go away with her. It's not that there's actually a solid offer of anything else. It's not really that she turns anything else down. And I also think that there's a way of I feel there's a way of looking at it, which is that there might be almost like another ending that happens just slightly outside the frame of the novel, which I know maybe feels a bit like cheating. But I think it's all to do with Sam and the age of Sam. And I think that I genuinely can't remember now what of this ended up on the page and what didn't. But I just think that give it a couple of years, there might be something different to do. But I think at the age he is and in her situation, I don't think she thinks it's the right thing to disrupt things for him. But it's not but I think the other thing as well is with happy endings or life in general, I just think life possibly has always been like this, but it does feel modern life is more like it. It's just so compromised, isn't it? And I felt actually I want to write an ending which is, and again it's difficult because it's not that satisfying in narrative terms. I mean, arguably novels exist to escape us from the compromised, muddy nature of our own lives. But I actually felt I wanted to write the sort of ending that did feel like more of a realistic, where there's fudge and compromise on both sides. Because the other thing is she goes off with him and then that goes wrong somehow. I didn't want that to happen. So in some ways I feel it's hopeful because it's not an Anna Karenina in which she throws caution to the wind, forgets her maternal responsibilities, goes off with someone who turns out to not be as promised. So that's what my thoughts are.
Can I point out with no amplification? Can I point out that my argument for the end still being a bit hopeful is that there's this other dimension to the book, which is to do with Anne's relationship to the past, and something has moved on and been settled about the loss of her father, and something has changed and got better between her and her brother. So although it's not romantic hopefulness, it felt to me as if her life was in that respect, in a kind of healthier and more hopeful place.
Yes, and that is what I think. And my friend Patrick Gale said it's a novel about childhood trauma dressed up in a rom-com frock. And, and that may have put you all off. But I do sometimes want to warn people, like, if you want to read a book about a really steamy affair, this probably isn't the one for you, because in percentage terms, it is, I think, more about other things. And there's a moment at the end, if you I don't want to, maybe you haven't read the novel and might read the novel, but if you ever get to the bit, if you do, and if you get to the bit where I'll start crying again, if you get to the bit where she's in the churchyard on her own, and she does that for me. So in some ways, it's not really about romance at all. Actually, romantic relationships, I think family, but again, everybody can have their own idea.
I think gentleman over here.
Thank you very much, Cathy. Can I encourage you to persist with Keith Thomas's wonderful book, Religion and the Decline of Magic? Yes. It's an extremely dense work of historical scholarship, but it does reward thorough reading. But you may need to be encouraged to keep going with it. My question, however, was, what are your principal literary influences?
Well, I mean, Narnia, actually, I would say. I'm completely obsessed with Narnia. I think about Narnia all the time. I don't ever really stop thinking about Narnia. I think that and I remember I was a very early reader, so I was reading them very early. I've almost no memories of my mother reading to me. I know she did, but I was just onto everything very, very young. But I do remember her reading The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, and I remember I was sitting at the table, and my brother was on the floor, and I just remember the sort of the of it. And I think as well, the thing with Narnia is it functions, I think, actually, it's about all books and all reading. That thing if you open a door and you're in another world. And the way I'm thinking, again, about whatever my own faith is, I feel it's a door. I've just found a door, and I'm just walked through this door into another world. So there's something for me about all those doors and levels, the crunch of the snow under your feet. So, and I've actually I want to read C.S. Lewis's non-fiction, and his other religious writings. So Narnia. And I've actually got a little model door at home. I bought it just I thought it would amuse any children that came to the house. But I increasingly use it in online writing classes. And I quite often get people to do exercises. Somebody comes to the door, we open a door, all that sort of things. I'm going through the door. I've got a bag there from Winchester Cathedral. I went in the shop this morning and bought a little door. The stonemasons have made out of reclaimed stone, and there was one that was just a door, and then I wasn't intending to buy anything, and I just thought I need to spend £60 on this very heavy thing that I'm then going to carry round because I want to have this reclaimed stone from Winchester Cathedral, this door. I want this somewhere in my house. So
Thank you. I'd like to take you back to your memoir. My name is Veronica Zundel, and I'm writing a memoir, and have been for about a decade, about my own brother's death. I did the very excellent Dyslexia Memoir School last year, in which you were a tutor, so thank you for that. I suppose what I want to ask is, what do you think makes a memoir engaging?
Well, I think I'd probably reverse a little bit in the question as you're asking me and you want to write a memoir, because I always think that if you want to write about your brother's death, there comes a point where if you want other people to read it, you have to think about what makes it engaging. But I think sometimes it would almost be better to just write about the thing we want to write about without having to worry about how other people are going to perceive it. Does that make sense? So the thing I really want to say to you is just write about your brother's death however you like. Don't worry that it takes a long time. My brother was knocked over when I was 17 and I finished my book when I was 42. Books actually do take often a long time. And often memoirs about difficult things take a very long time. And if you eventually want people to read it, that somehow all adds to the composting, I think. There's something about the layering of that. None of that's unusual. So having said that, that's what I really want to say to you. And then in terms of what makes a memoir engaging, I'll go back to C.S. Lewis. I think if you can open a door and then you can bring the reader into the world, show them the world, and then let them make up their own minds about what they see, I think it's that. No preaching, no trying to get anyone on your side. Just, here you go, I'm opening this door, this is what I see. And yeah, so good luck. And good luck with the next decade. Let's imagine it'll still take quite a long time, because then you won't have too much expectation of yourself.
Cathy, I think you might be a major resource for the church because you obviously understand the situation of clergy wives or clergy husbands. And that is so important. Most of us who are in parishes just let them lead. But leaders need support. And my feeling is that you're an ideal supporter. I wondered if you had a clergy wife or clergy husband who you are in fact supporting.
No, but I'm not. And I must say as well, actually, I'll admit at this point as well that Tim, the difficult vicar, there's a pinch of me in him as well. Because one of the things about being a writer is you get to go places. And I don't think it's a dissimilar feeling from potentially the rush of being in the pulpit. Everybody thinks I'm amazing. This feels quite nice. Now I have to go home and wrangle with my own dishwasher. And that, so I know that tension from myself, from my own life. I could very easily spend, and it's funny, it makes it sound like I could spend all my life in the service of strangers, in much more psychological comfort than I would in my own house, having to feed my own child, really. And I don't quite know why that is, but I just know that it's true of me, and possibly it's true of other people, and I think it's probably true of a lot of clergy. And there is something about the gifts that mean you can talk to strangers and move them, and there's something about all of that, I feel, that does seem to render you less able to cook meals and to chop vegetables without chopping off your fingers. And I experience this with writing. Like, the more inspired I feel, the more I feel like the muse is on my shoulder, the less able I am to walk down the street without tripping up, and the less able I am to do sensible things. Remembering doctor's appointments, even for myself, let alone other people in my family. So that's my thing. So I think I obviously really like supporting other human beings, but very much in a non-granular way that doesn't really involve having to care about whether when they get dressed, if they eat food, whether their relationship with the bureaucratic state, all of that I find incredibly difficult. But I think I hope I do understand. I think actually vocation is hard in the modern world, and I think that's also teachers, doctors. There's something about the way the structures, the church, education, the health service. There's something about the way the structures exert power somehow. And there's something about the way where it's difficult to be a decent human being and do your best and look other people in the eye and focus on that. Because everybody's always wanting to kick off about something else you're supposed to be doing. So, yes, I don't know whether it'll be of any practical help at all, but thank you for saying that. It's very sweet.
Right, I think we should offer a final round of applause now, because we are